Welcome back, everyone, and to this next very interesting conversation with the president and the CEO of Ericsson. We've had presidents of the council, and now it is also time to have presidents from business and hear their version of how we boost the technology development of Europe through investment and, of course, through regulation. So a big welcome to Börje Ekholm, who is the CEO and president of Ericsson. Velkommen, Börje, til vores Masters of Digital.
Tack, Cecilia. Ser fram emot att köra den här på ett nordiskt språk.
Yeah, so we better switch to English again. And I want to remind Börje that we actually had a handball match. And I don't know who won. Can you remember that, Börje? Was it?
I only know who came in second. That was Sweden. But I can't remember who won.
Okay, joke aside, welcome and thank you very much for actually joining us here today. I mean, we think we are at the edge of a great breakthrough in Europe. Everybody talks about digital. The recovery plan is focused at digital investment. The policies are being made in Europe for making a more seamless and harmonized digital internal market. So I'm interested very much to hear, you are in the business of 5G, and it is an area where Europe actually has the leaders, the digital leaders. We have Ericsson, Nokia, and a lot of leadership actually in these technologies. So what do you think will be the role that 5G will play for the next industrial wave, and how do you see it moving forward in Europe right now?
Yeah, well, Cecilia, I think it's worthwhile to take a step back, and like all crises, the COVID-19 pandemic will basically accelerate already ongoing trends, and in this case, it's the digitalization. So I think digitalization depends on connectivity, and thus 5G must sit at the heart of the recovery strategy. And the world stands at the brink of limitless connectivity. With 5G, wireless can for the first time actually be the primary choice of connectivity or access technology. As industries digitalize, it's inevitable there will lead to job losses, both among blue-collar and white-collar workers. And these jobs will not come back, because it's going to be massive productivity gains and customer gains that comes out of digitalization. But it's all about creating new jobs in new industries that actually compensate and generate even further employment than these jobs that will become obsolete. And I think here Europe really needs a policy that focuses on the job creation in new sectors, so all new jobs are not only created in Northeast Asia and North America. We like to see European jobs being created. But to give a sense of this type of opportunity, think about the platform companies that have been created over the past decade. And I'm thinking of like Facebook, Netflix, Alibaba, TikTok, and they all rely on 4G for distribution. Many of these companies have been established in the US or in China. And those two continents were actually 2 to 3 years ahead of Europe of building out 4G networks. I think infrastructure defines success. In the offline world, it would be rather unexpected to find that a country without roads would build the best cars. It's simply not a coincidence that Germany developed global automotive champions, leveraging the best road network in the world with Autobahn. And digital infrastructure, that is the roads of the 21st century. And the digital industry, more importantly, has some other advantages, as it doesn't require a home market. Distribution can go global immediately on the digital highways. But what 4G did for the consumer and for consumer-facing industries, 5G will do for enterprises. Our own estimates that we've done on a report together with Qualcomm that Analysis Mason have put together shows that it's 270 billion of annual economic benefits for the EU, which corresponds to a 2% GDP annual uplift. And the return of investments would be 7x. The problem here is simply that the companies building the infrastructure, the European operators, generates a return on capital that's less than their cost of capital. And that's why they simply postpone investments in 5G. So in 4G, the discussion in Europe went, where is the use case of 4G? Why do I need this? Instead, the Americans and the Chinese, they raced ahead, building 4G networks with national coverage, giving those two countries a 2 to 3 year advantage over Europe. And instead, China and the US focused on the new companies that was built on top of the 4G infrastructure. And today, those type of companies, platform companies, significantly exceeds the telecom operators from a market value perspective. I think it's an interesting illustration that a new startup in America called Peloton that does home spinning or home cycling, it's an app and a cycle. Actually, the market cap of that company is now bigger than almost all European operators. The only one that's bigger is Deutsche Telekom, with a big US presence. So what we see here, Europe has already fallen behind Northeast Asia and the US in race for 5G connectivity. Of China's mobile subscriber base, 11%, which is almost more than 150 million subscribers, is now on 5G. In the US, it's 4%, and in Europe, it's 1%. Korea has already nationwide coverage of their 5G networks. And 5G is actually a cornerstone of China's economic plan. And during this presentation and Q&A, they will build 30 5G base stations. The interesting thing, and you alluded to that, European technology leaders, Ericsson and Nokia, are both busy rolling out 5G networks in front-runner countries around the world that seek to replicate the success China and the US had in the consumer app economy. We at Ericsson, we invest 4 billion euros in R&D annually, and we employ almost 40,000 people in Europe. Along with Nokia, we are the two survivors of a brutal industry consolidation over the past 20 years. And it has actually resulted in telecom being one of the few areas in technology that Europe can claim strategic autonomy. But this is really not about telecom. It's actually about creating an open digital platform, a digital infrastructure that can build the new companies of the future that will stimulate entrepreneurship, innovators to leverage the technology to build the next big platform companies in enterprise or in consumer applications. Thinking here about manufacturing, thinking about logistics, e-health, learning, etc. I think Europe's job creation is at stake in building the digital infrastructure, and it's really time to act and act fast.
Thank you so much. So I really hear that Europe is really lagging behind of creating the underlying structure for growth, which is, of course, like we've done with all the highways and all the motorways in Europe, the digital infrastructure. Do you see that changing? Are you positive? Do you think that this digital recovery plan or the changes of this crisis, I would say the inevitable problems created on connectivity but also really seeing how vital it is for the function of our society? Do you think the will is there now and the opportunity, and maybe the opportunity, but is the will there to change this in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the will is there. I hope the will is there. But the most important thing is now to translate the will into action and start to be concrete. And we think, for example, what's been clarified in the pandemic is, of course, the digital divide. We have many parts of Europe that actually are unconnected. And if you have to migrate to work from home or do education from home, it's of course a disaster if you have no connectivity or poor connectivity. And here we think, the call it 5G, 4G and 5G is actually a solution to that problem. And already today, the 4G infrastructure can actually provide similar or speeds and connectivity comparable to fiber to the home. And as most consumers actually have fiber to the home and then Wi-Fi in the home. So as a matter of fact, already today, the technology allows to bridge that digital divide. And with 5G, you will basically have fiber to all devices, which is going to be an interesting way of creating or closing the digital divide. But I even think more of 5G as a solution for connectivity in cities. So many parts of Europe are under fiberized, what I would say. And actually, with 5G, you create airborne fiber. So we can much faster give the connectivity to the citizens of Europe by building out 5G very, very fast. The problem we have, or put it this way, a large part of the 750 billion euros in the recovery funds are allocated to the digital infrastructure. It's really time to speed that up and make sure that's leveraged very, very quickly. But I would also take a few minutes on one thing which I think is also important, and that is the market structure in Europe. In reality, the mobile operators simply do not have enough profitability to defend investing in the network. And that I think, should longer term be addressed as well. And then we're talking about, spectrum release, we're talking about other permitting processes, regulation. We're talking about, Europe has, as a comparison, more than 100 operators, actually 400 if you include the virtual mobile networks, compared to the US, 3 operators, India, 3 operators, China, 3 operators. So somehow here, I think we need to allow scale to play a bigger role in Europe in order to ensure that the operators are profitable. And I think here, to be frank and maybe a bit blunt, and I apologize for that, but I am Swedish, so we're a bit more straight maybe. But the reality is the current legislation and regulation in Europe has driven down consumer prices and roaming prices, but we get what we pay for, i.e. poor network performance and poor coverage. As a matter of fact, 30% of all Europeans do not even have access to 4G today. Compare that to China, compare that to the US or most Asian countries and actually even a fair number of African countries. That would be embarrassing to see.
I think you made a very good point also on the digital divide, right? I think it has become obvious for especially rural areas, but also some specific countries, that their coverage is not allowing for children to go to school or for people to work from home, or even for industry to act and use the latest technology to actually control their factories more from a distance and others. So a huge potential there. So looking at sustainability, so we have this green and digital. How do you see the connectivity between these two areas?
That's a great question. And I think, as a matter of fact, the digital infrastructure is yet again going to prove to be critical. I would say this is probably one of our generation biggest question. Call it how we resolve the climate crisis that the world is facing. And I believe the telecom industry has a really critical role to play. Digital technologies have a huge potential and outside role to play in reducing the global carbon emissions. And our investigations say that it can reduce global carbon emissions by 15% by 2030. And that's actually 1/3 of the 50% reduction target set by the Paris Climate Accord. And as an open innovation platform, we see 5G can have direct positive impact on industries to reduce net CO2 emissions. We're talking smart agriculture, we're talking public transportation systems, we're talking smarter power grids, and uptake of electric vehicles, etc. And here the power grid will clearly be one of the major constraints in that. And optimizing how you run the power grid will be critical if we're going to see electric vehicles dominate the roads. And I think all of this, they're much bigger than teleworking that we use the digital infrastructure for today. So the benefit for society is enormous. But I also think that energy efficiency is also another reason why I think we should press ahead in Europe now on building out the 5G infrastructure. And we should do that instead of, spending too much money and time on what I would label experimental technologies, such as ORAN, for example, that will not mature in another few years, making Europe fall behind on the rollout of 5G networks. And we see here, ORAN will clearly play a role in the future. That's no question. And we're investing heavily. We're one of the drivers, actually, in the standardization on ORAN. But what we see is it has significant energy shortcomings. Our calculations would indicate that it consumes about 40% more energy than a current radio network. So we think there are also energy benefits here of focusing on rolling out the current technologies to leverage kind of the efficiency gains in the whole economy.
Thank you so much. And maybe one last question before we turn also to a question from the audience, because we are running out of time. But you have heard the president of the council speaking about strategic autonomy. What does that mean to you, and particularly in respect to European companies' relationship in other regions?
Yeah, I fully understand the quality emotional appeal of strategic autonomy, but I think we must very much avoid seeing strategic autonomy as protectionism. Just Ericsson, we have 99% of our sales outside of our home market. So we are truly dependent on free and open trade globally. And I would say no government in Europe, and probably not even EU as a totality, can match the investments the platform companies in the ICT industry makes today in R&D. So digital protectionism, I think, is really dangerous for Europe. But so for us in our industry, we're a bit different also. We're free trade, but we have also a global ecosystem. So, and that's not developed by coincidence. So the European actors, that's us and Nokia, combined with Asian players, have defined this global standard that today allows 8 billion subscribers to be connected globally. And it allows us to travel to any country in the world and we can connect our phone. But most importantly, it has allowed driving down the cost of the ecosystem. So the cost of devices and cost of connectivity are now so low that even what would be labeled before, call it less fortunate countries, can now connect and can develop their own telecommunication infrastructure. That would not be possible without a global standard. So I think there is a danger here when governments in Europe are starting to talk about, we should allocate part of the recovery fund into different technologies. I think the market should decide on those technologies, and it can. And anything that runs the risk of fragmenting the global ecosystem will have repercussions on, call it, the global economy. And thus, that is not a positive, I think. So I honestly think telecom is one of the few technology sectors where Europe has already today strategic autonomy, as we have Nokia and us. And I think that is something we should capitalize upon, not kind of ruin.
turn, we will actually also hear from our president from Nokia tomorrow morning also. So I will turn one question from the audience. It's Tony Graziano, Director of GoTo Consulting. Mr. Ekholm, if you were the president of the Commission, what would you have done differently about the 5G than the current Commission has done? Did the question go through?
You were cutting out last part of the question.
Okay, I will try one more time. Apologies. So this is a question from Tony Graziano, Director from GoTo Consulting, who is asking you, Mr. Ekholm, if you were the president of the Commission.
I don't hear you, actually. We need better US connectivity, possibly, but...
Oh, my God. So maybe I can ask my team to send you directly in the chat the question, so I make sure that you can also read it. And it should be in the chat. So basically asking, if you were the president of the Commission, what would you have done differently about the 5G than the Commission has done now? So I don't know who is losing who, but...
Okay.
So Börje, can you still hear it?
A couple of things. I would do a short-term solution, which is help the industry or allow the recovery funds and deploy that very quickly in building out coverage in Europe, both on cities but also on rural areas, to ensure that you close the digital divide. I think that's going to be ultra critical. And here the Commission can fast forward the money into the build out. But I would also do a couple of things to solve the longer term problem. Not a believer that subsidies functioning market policies is more attractive in Europe. So, take one thing. I think, for example, extend the length of a license. So it's national legislation, but I would promote that as a Europe and try to harmonize. So, think about those. If you're very unlikely to invest in improving efficiency, possibly in the house, you're going to wait because you don't know if you control it after 20 years when the lease expires. That actually happened to Tele2 in Norway. They lost license and term of upgrading to the latest technology in an existing network. I would also streamline the planning and permitting process. The EU toolbox contains tools. I would use those. I would also, basically, I would allow for a different industry policy to actually consolidate the European operators. So it would be fewer. So we'll go from 100 to a different number. I think that would be very sound to do, which in combination with the spectrum and streamlining the planning and permitting would lead to a fundamentally different profitability structure in the industry, and thus allowing all the participants to invest as much as they can in the network. That's then economically justifiable. So I would focus more on those longer term issues. And I know that's contrarian to what the EU Commission have done historically, but I think it's time to rethink those.
Thank you so much. I would say very concrete pieces of advice. 3, invest now, make sure that we don't wait and wait and wait. Allow for consolidation of a market that needs consolidation, and look at the harmonization of the auction rules and the terms of these. Thank you so much for actually joining us here and for also giving us very concrete advice from the businesses. And as I always say, if we don't have the skills and if we don't have the connectivity, it will be pretty hard to digitalize anything in Europe. So thank you so much, Börje, for attending us here and for spending the time with us. Thank you a lot.
Thanks, Cecilia.
Right. So turning to the audience, we will in a minute also look at one of the, as I said, there are two things that is kind of the prerequisite for the digitalization of Europe, the infrastructure and the skills. And this is exactly what we will be looking at in a minute. And I urge you to stay on because there is a cool video coming up produced from ITB from Denmark on digital skills in schools and BBC. And a very, very good panel on exactly how to boost the digital skills in Europe. Thank you.